Welcome to Autistic People Talking, a podcast where autistic people talk. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Claire, and this is my channel, Woodshed Theory. Here, I make content about what it is like to live as an adult on the autism spectrum and whatever else feels good to me. So if that sounds good to you, or if you're feeling particularly gracious today, and I hope that you are, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, ring the bell. I almost forgot to mention that I put out videos a few times a week, so click the like and the share. Everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome to Autistic People Talking, a podcast where autistic people talk. Today, I have a very special guest I've been looking forward to for quite a while. It is Karen from Proudly Autistic. Welcome, Karen. It is great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. Now, I always ask this in a bit of a joking manner, but why don't you tell the audience why you think you're here?
Well, I'm here to talk to a fellow autistic person, but no, I'm here to talk about what it's like to be autistic and get to know you better.
I need to figure out a new way to ask the question, but you're here because you have
Yeah.
an amazing platform on YouTube for your channel, Proudly Autistic. I would love to hear a little bit more about that channel, how it got started, and what is it all about?
Okay. Well, the channel got started. I started this channel a few years after I was diagnosed. So I was diagnosed the week of my 40th birthday. Didn't really know how to handle all that as far as people's reactions to it. And it put me in a bad place. And it took me a while to really come to peace, find peace with it. Not so much that I was autistic, I was fine with that, honestly, but be more confident about identifying as autistic, even if I got static from other people. And as part of that process, I grew very frustrated with other people's reactions. I didn't feel that it was right and felt that it was somewhat my responsibility to advocate and to get out there and provide representation, what it's like to be autistic and to start tackling some of the stigma. And not only was it personal for me, but I also have an autistic child. I have another child who's neurodivergent more broadly. And it's one thing for me to be older and to be dealing with this, but I couldn't sit back knowing that my children might face this as well. I felt not only my own frustration personally, but that I had to do something for them, do the best I could to try to address the stigma. So that's why the channel started.
And what kind of videos would you say you put out?
It's a mix, some part advocacy, trying to add language, to bring language into our community conversations and start thinking about, again, how to communicate about our experiences, how to advocate for ourselves when we have interactions with others, to start equipping us with language. So that's part of it. The other part is just the representation, showing, okay, I'm autistic, I'm different than the stereotype. It's part of the reason why I wasn't diagnosed until age 40. And I was even told when I was diagnosed, I was like, well, why was it missed? And my practitioner said, well, you have a great job, you have multiple degrees, not only you have a great job, but you own a business, you have all these things going for you. You're not on the radar. You don't act autistic. And so again, that's part of the content too, of just showing a different side of what autism can look like. And I do that, try to make it relatable through my own stories.
How has the response been to your channel? And has anything surprised you about it?
The response has been positive, and I think the surprise has been how many people I've actually been able to connect with, right? Because I just put it out into the universe, not really knowing what I was getting into. And by my own measures, I feel like I've been pretty successful in the short time that I've been out there, and that's was surprising to me because again, I just put myself out into the universe, literally not knowing what to expect. Um, so that was a surprise. It's been nice a lot of times when I just talk about my own personal stories, how I experience autism, because a lot of it is just talking about how I experience it. I'm not saying I'm an expert, I'm not trying to speak for a psychologist or anything like that. But I do get a lot of feedback where it's like, wow, I finally feel understood, or it's so nice to hear someone speaking my story. And so that has been nice too, and a bit unanticipated because I thought I was just gonna speak into the void, right?
I
So
felt
that was
exactly
nice.
the same way. I thought that I was just going to, yes, speak into the void is the perfect way to put it. And I thought that the only thing that was ever going to come back was negative.
Mhm.
So I braced myself for that. So I was very shocked at the unexpected amount of positivity that came back and the amount of people, especially uh, women who are around my age, reaching out and saying, like, thank you because I see myself in you and I haven't seen myself in other people in the autism community. So I completely relate to what you're saying. It's pretty scary to put yourself out there. How long from between your diagnosis was it until you started sharing your story publicly?
About 3 years, I want to say.
Okay.
Um, 3, 4 years, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so you had some time to kind of grapple with it and get a little more comfortable.
Yeah, because when I was first diagnosed, I initially was very open with people. And the immediate response I got was, don't talk about that.
Mm,
No one will take you seriously. You can't talk about that. Just you come off pretty normal. And that was just so insulting. And they didn't even understand it. Like, no one really knows anything's wrong. You come off pretty normal. Just keep hiding it, or just try a little harder. You're doing a pretty good job. And again, just so insulting, and I didn't even recognize it. So then I was just so frustrated because it's like, okay, so you like one aspect of me, and it was some of my autistic traits, right, that I would bring to the workplace, and I really excelled in certain areas. They loved that part of me, and they would never acknowledge that that was my autistic traits. This was just somehow I was able to do things that my other peers could not do.
mm,
But they wouldn't attach that to autism. It was just those quirky things. And so I just became more resentful that I had to hide the autism, and they were only associating the autism with the bad things. And it got to a point, well, also what was occurring was in what I was doing, I was a consultant, I was getting less work after I
mm.
revealed to my consultants that I was autistic.
Yes.
And so I became very, very frustrated, resentful,
Mm,
but I didn't know what to do because I was put in this predicament of how do I stay employed? I'm
yeah.
very resentful. I'm angry. I'm kind of getting to a point where I really don't like these people, but I want a job. And it finally came to a point where my work was just naturally transitioning into something else. And I thought, okay, yeah, after a few years, I'm ready to take that step and speak out because I don't feel like I have much to lose at this point. But it was definitely a process.
It's interesting because I do hear that, and I know it was my reaction to my diagnosis as well, was to start sharing it with the people around me,
Mhm.
but I hear a lot, and it was my experience, and you're kind of saying the same thing, where maybe it's this innate trust that autistic people have in people
Mhm.
that, okay, if it really isn't, if I really am the same person to you, then nothing would change if I told you this about myself. And that's where I am for people sharing their diagnosis if they feel comfortable. However, sometimes it's not always the best idea.
Mhm.
And learning who you can trust with the information can be a whole journey in itself, because there are people who will treat you differently because of different stigmas. They will treat you differently after you tell them.
Mhm.
And it's sometimes it's not, um what am I trying to say? Sometimes it's not super noticeable, but you can tell by the things that they're saying and then the fact that they've backed off a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. When I shared, I literally felt like I could see my IQ dropping as far as how they perceived me.
Yes, yeah,
Because I mean, and these are people that I knew for years, and I just felt like they thought less of me, even though they've known me for years, right? And it was hurtful.
mm,
And I had others who would go as far as to start like over explaining simple concepts to me. They started explaining social situations to me and things where they felt they had the right now to do this. Now that I revealed this part of me, that they can now tell me, oh, well, Karen, this is what's actually occurring, or, all this facts, story stuff, all these things that honestly, a lot of times I was picking up on because I would not have been able to survive in that environment.
right? We
To that
learn
point,
we
had I not been able to pick up on, but all of a sudden they felt they needed to coach me.
mm,
And it was just really insulting. It was really hard to exist in that environment, but I didn't know what to do because again, that was my I mean, that was my job. What am I supposed to do? Just quit? you know?
right.
Um,
And
yeah.
so many people who are on the spectrum don't work,
Mhm.
and but want to. After I finished with my last job and I started this endeavor, one of the reasons I did that, I wouldn't say it was out of, not like out of a fear aspect, but not wanting to have to deal with that anymore. Like the questions, or because I don't want to have to hide a part of myself to be
Mhm.
respected when I know my own capabilities and I know what I bring to the table, and what I bring to the table is worth something. Um, wow, I could go on and on about this because it puts you in a very precarious situation where if you disclose, then you have to deal with other people's reactions. But then if you don't disclose and it comes out later, then there's the question of, well, why didn't you tell anybody?
Yeah, no, there's so much to say on this topic. But yeah, just in regards to being self-employed, I tried that. I'm horrible at managing my business. I'm not sure. It's just it's a lot of times the advice, oh well, you could just start your own business. And there's quite a few things to consider. Because one is like marketing. Some businesses, you don't necessarily need to seek out your clients, right? But like in my case, as a consultant, I have to seek out clients and I'm terrible. So that was a problem. I'm also with my ADHD, I'm very disorganized and I really rely on that structure within that traditional office environment. So I felt stuck, even though I had worked for myself. I wasn't very successful in that capacity.
Right. And I'm
Um,
shaking my
yeah,
head because I understand where you're coming from.
yeah, yeah.
It's not, it is, I don't know that I would consider it a solution to just go into business for yourself. because not everyone has this the space or the capability
Mhm.
for to be able to grow it. What if what if you need additional help and you don't have it? There
Mhm.
is like a safety in working for an established business where there's like a safety net there that you don't have with your own business. Um, so yeah, I completely get where you're coming from.
And then the other thing I get from the workplace is where the comments I've received, I definitely agree with this, is where you feel like you're either pushed to having to perform outside your comfort zone, where you're intellectually challenged, but you're just constantly burning yourself out. So
Mm,
that's one option. And the other one is where you're respecting your boundaries, you're not burning out, but you're understimulated. You know you could do more.
mm,
And it's very frustrating, I think, for our community that that is our two choices.
yeah.
Yeah, burning out to the extreme, but at least do something interesting or do something that might be a bit boring, but at least you have your sanity. You know, it would be great if we could find something in the middle. And a lot of that, I think, comes with being able to disclose and being honest with our employers and that being safe. But we haven't reached that point yet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I totally get what you're saying, where you're coming from. It makes me think of some of the things that I used to struggle with as an employed autistic person, but undiagnosed. And it kind of makes me laugh now because I remember my boss saying something like, uh, when you come to work, you kind of have to like put your personal self into a suitcase and leave that suitcase at the door. And like basically, she was just describing what masking was.
Mhm.
And when she was describing this, I was like, doesn't everybody do that? Like, doesn't everyone have like their work self? And or when they would say like, oh, when you're not at work, you should be, unplug, relax. And I used to think, how? Like, I can't sleep at night because I'm like so focused on my job. Like, I can't let anything go. So it's interesting now to like look back at how I used to be pre-diagnosis. Have you noticed anything like that? That has changed, like in how you work since getting a diagnosis?
Yes, no. One of the biggest challenges I had, I think, post diagnosis was um, of withdrawing a lot as far as not wanting to be very open with people, of just really wanting to keep my private life very private because of what had happened. Um, I think that's the biggest one. There's plenty of other things I could look back at the past, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that just because I was oblivious to social rules. I mean, I, I don't think I masked that well. I had selective mutism until really into high school. I forced myself out of it by joining clubs and certain things because I was very depressed and I knew something had to change. But my point is, like, for most of my life or my younger life, I lived in this little bubble. And even when I was in my 20s, I don't know. I didn't really understand a lot of what it meant to be social. It was just very much trial and error. And
Mm.
I think people just said, well, she's quirky, you know, and they just accepted me because I was talented and I got through it. But so it's more, I just kind of grown and looking like, oh, you know, yeah, just if anything was just really obvious. I don't know why it took so long. You know,
Well,
I don't know.
speaking of that kind of subject,
Yeah.
how how did you come about coming to know about your autism and getting diagnosed? You can share as much as you want or little as you'd like,
It's fine.
but I'd love to hear more about, and I'm sure people listening would love to hear more about how, you said that you were it was the week of your 40th birthday when you got your diagnosis. How did you get to that point?
It it's funny. Well, there's just a lot of different things going on at the time. I've been open about some of this. I haven't specifically got into this issue yet. It's just I haven't filmed it yet. It's not fine talking about it, but I have been open about having CPTSD, significant from numerous situations. So one of them has been that burden of not so much masking, but being different. I experienced extreme bullying. I'm sure many of the viewers have as well. And that changes you.
Mm,
And I still have moments where I might think of something in the past and it just like will just stop me in my tracks, you know. So I still have issues with that. But I also have CPTSD from other issues. So I have a narcissistic parent, so I'm no contact from them. I also was in a very serious relationship with a narcissist. I have CPTSD from that whole situation. And then I also have just your traditional PTSD from another issue. So I have all this, right? And so what happened, and now I realize it was like the perfect storm. So I was going through quite a bit of stress. I think part of it was, I don't know so much masking, but burnout. It was the autistic burnout. I was pushing myself so hard in my career and I just couldn't push myself any further. So that was one side of it. And then there's issues with the PTSD that were just coming to a head that I had not properly addressed. And they were starting to, it was expressing itself in a physical way. I
mm,
actually developed a movement disorder, a functional neurological disorder. And it pretty much, it looks like seizures when I have these episodes. And so this was happening, I was having these seizures essentially with some frequency. And so I pursued two options. One, part of me thought, okay, well, this might be psychological. And then I also went more the traditional route and I saw a neurologist and did all these just horrible tests to pinpoint that it was actually a FND. But in the meantime, I went to a psychologist because I thought maybe that was something to do with it. Because of the stress and because of everything. And initially, I went in there thinking I had borderline personality disorder because I had the dysfunctional family life. I checked a lot of boxes.
mhm,
I did have problems with relationships, of just that connection and all that. So I just thought, okay, maybe it's just BPD. And it was after several sessions, and again, a lot of this was just trying to figure out what was going on with me because just I was kind of at crisis mode.
mm,
And it was after several sessions where she was ready to diagnose me, so much so she had all the paperwork. This was like the session before. She said, Karen, I'm going to talk to you about your diagnosis in the next session. So it was no secret. And I just was starting to talk about trivial things. I was really upset about something with the coworker. And it was the way I was talking about the coworker and the situation. And she kept trying to redirect me back to, I am going to talk to your diagnosis. You know, you want to know what's going on, I'm going to tell you. And I just wasn't connecting to that. And
mm,
not only that, it was like that rumination. Like I was just going over, I can't believe my coworker did this. And she's like, well, maybe she's trying to get me to empathize with her. I'm like, but
mm,
no, she should have understood, you know, really black and white. So I was exhibiting all these traits. And that's when it clicked with her. And she's like, well, no, Karen, actually, I was about to diagnose you with BPD because it kind of fits, but it's actually autism. And I was very lucky because I sought her out because she treated BPD, but she also treated autism. And I think that's a tip for viewers, those who are struggling with diagnosis, particularly women,
mm,
especially if you're getting misdiagnosed, find someone who specializes both in whatever you or feel like you might be misdiagnosed with, specializes in that and autism, because there's people that try to delineate the two. And so thankfully she specialized in both and she was able to see the difference. I got very lucky. But yeah, so that's how I stumbled upon my diagnosis in a very unintentional way. I was not expecting autism whatsoever.
Well, you weren't expecting it, so what was your response?
It was relief,
Hmm.
uh, because it was finally, because as soon as she said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. That's yeah, that's it. And it was relief because I finally understood what was happening after all these years of thinking something was wrong with me. Because it wasn't so much I thought I was different. Again, I went through much of my life very oblivious. I think it probably took me a lot longer than many people, um, to recognize, because it wasn't until my late 20s, maybe even 30, early 30s, where I really realized, like, um, yeah, this is just too hard for me. This just seems just much more intuitive for other people. And not only is it hard for me, no matter how hard I try, I can't figure it out. I
Right.
just kind of suck at this, and I don't know why. And it just took me a very long time to click with that. And then it's like, okay, I guess I'm just bad at this, just naturally, because I suspect a lot of us feel this way, because had it been something that warranted a diagnosis, why did not, someone not mention it earlier, right? So it doesn't even enter, you don't even think that it could be something,
Right. No.
because no one said anything. You're just, again, it goes back to the quirky, you're shy, you're a little unusual, but that's just who you are. And yeah, but yeah, so it was a relief to finally know that that's what it was, because there was a lot of self-loathing as
Mm.
far as why I couldn't figure things out. So that gave me what I forgave myself, not only for really more just I forgave myself for being so hard on myself, but also um apologize to myself,
Yeah,
for how I treated myself. So it was kind of both sides of it.
it is. I think you use the word freeing, relief. Like it is a feeling of relief. I know that for myself. Um, I, I have OCD and different OCD and autism, and when I finally got help for that, it wasn't like I hadn't spent, um, you spend years kind of silently suffering, no support, kind of seeking out help where you can seek it out, but not really understanding yourself. So when somebody validates that, oh yeah, this is hard for you because of the way that your brain is wired,
Mhm.
it is, it's like you can uh, put down the heavy thing that you've been carrying around and stop being so hard on yourself all the time for not being neurotypical.
Yeah.
That's and I will say there are still times where I struggle with like the internalized ableism, like what I should be able to do and who I should be able to be and what goals I should be able to reach in my life. I still struggle with that some, but it's so much better than it was because I used to just feel like a failure. Like it didn't matter how many degrees I got. It didn't matter, what I, what my job was or, I couldn't get there. Like I couldn't get to where I was just at peace with myself. And the autism diagnosis gave that to me, where I could finally take a deep breath and say, oh, maybe it's okay that I reevaluate my life choices and go in a different direction. And I can live in a different way that better suits my needs. But I wouldn't know that unless I had gotten the diagnosis. So I feel like it's a miracle, like it's a miracle that um that kind of sounds like a little spiritual, but and that's not necessarily where I'm trying to go with it, but I'm just so grateful that I was able to first get the help that I needed with my OCD, which allowed me to get to a place where I could even think. and have an open mind to the autism
Mhm.
because I was so sick for a very long time that I just couldn't even really think straight. So, but that's my chat part. So,
No, I completely get that though, because it's that overcompensation, right? Of feeling like you're not enough. I mean, it's ridiculous. I have 3 degrees. Okay. And I have so many
me too,
certifications
girl.
and all. I have all this stuff, this paper, to just try to prove that I'm worth it, that I deserve to be there. And so that was part of it. It was that relief of not only finding, okay, this is who I am finally, and taking that pressure off. But like I was saying, it was the apologizing to myself. I'm
Yeah.
sorry I pushed you so hard. You did not deserve that. And then like I was having this weird little conversation with myself. I'm sorry. And like it's okay, um, but yeah, and a lot of that was I need to stop pushing myself because it's like killing me. Again, I had a functional neurological disorder and that's not going to go away. I can manage it, but because I pushed myself so hard. So, yeah, no, I get it. So it's been nice to be able to find that acceptance of, okay, this is who I am. This is my parameters, these are my limits, and that's okay. I think the big challenge has been when you accept yourself and you're setting those boundaries, but then other people don't accept those boundaries, or they don't want to hear about the boundaries. They're like, we don't want to hear about the autism. Just pretend like you were who you were, or who we
That was
thought
one
you
of
were.
my first responses when telling somebody, like, but you're still the same person.
Yeah.
And so things should not change. And I was just so taken aback by that viewpoint because in my mind, it changed everything.
Mhm.
That everything I thought about myself, the way I'd behave towards other people, like, um, I wouldn't necessarily like you, even when you like talked about bullying, like I don't necessarily think that I was a bully, but I think that there were some mirroring bullying behaviors or some because of different like misunderstandings socially or, like I wasn't always happy with the person that I was trying to figure out how to act, how to behave, um, who I was in social situations. Who was that person? Who did I actually want to be? Like I felt that the information changed everything. So to hear somebody say, "No, you're fine the way that you are. This doesn't change anything." So you shouldn't even, it's so slight. Like it's
Mhm.
not so severe. So you're fine.
You're just a little bit autistic. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, oh, well, that's not how I viewed it at all. I viewed it as this is the answer that I've been looking for. So I don't know how you felt, but I was like, I can no longer. I mean, the reason that I went on the whole journey that eventually led me to the autism diagnosis is because I couldn't do it anymore.
Mhm.
Like you can only hold the mask up for so long. And then eventually things really start to fall apart and people notice. I mean,
Mhm.
I've talked to other people before about how a lot of people who are on the autism spectrum, they only last like a few years at a job, right? Because you do so well that people are like, wow, you are doing great. You're surpassing expectations. And then eventually you hit a point where you can't keep it up anymore.
Mhm.
And then people notice that and they're like, well, what's changed? It's like, well, I can't do it anymore. I can't pretend anymore.
I think you're actually hitting on numerous things there too. So one part of it, what I've noticed and what I've just anecdotally heard from others is that, um, so for me, that time between starting your job and burning out and needing to quit, when you're younger, it could be a few years or whatever, there's a baseline. You start at one point, and as you get older, that decreases. So for me, it was a few years. I know some people, they start at just a few months or a few weeks. I mean, it's different for everyone, but it's like when they're younger, that first job, I did say that might be the best case, but kind of, and then you start to understand, especially when once you know you're autistic, it gets, I think, even worse. But even when you don't, you do start to recognize the pattern of why
Mm,
do I constantly burn out? And it just, the same pressures are there and you get exhausted quicker. And for me, the last two jobs, I had this ridiculous job situation earlier in the year. I've had 3 jobs in the past 6 months. I have a good one now, but like the first day I started in those previous 2 jobs, I was burnt out immediately. Like I'm done in one day, like in hours, I was already done. So that's part of it. I think another part, so it's just the decreasing patience and just ability to tolerate all of it. I think it decreases with age, and then so that might push us for answers because we just don't can't manage it anymore. But on the other side, when you're talking about you do well and then you hit some sort of wall and you don't, one thing I am really challenged with, and I'm dealing with it right now to limited, maybe not very good, success, is just that internal dialogue of, I'm a failure, I'm going to fail, I'm going to mess up, I'm going to disappoint
mhm,
everyone.
mhm,
And having to remind myself, well, I haven't done that yet. I can succeed. I haven't done that. So stop sabotaging yourself. That's part of it. And then it's just a rejection of, well, people don't like me anyway, right? The rejection
mhm,
sensitivity.
mhm,
So
mhm,
there's just I know I tend to sabotage myself. And the more I let that little voice get into my head, I I deteriorate as far as my work product. And then it's like, oh yeah, look, I suck, look how
mhm,
terrible I'm doing and missing deadlines. I'm not as productive as I used to be. Yeah, I kind of deserve this. And it just gets worse and worse. And then I either
mhm,
quit or to avoid getting fired or get let go. So I think for a lot of people, I think that internal dialogue is not helpful. And it's warranted because we've dealt with things like that our whole life, right? People criticizing us. So of course we then project it on ourselves. But
mhm. And we have very high expectations of ourselves.
yes.
Yeah, I've talked about, well, several things. I've talked about that before, where the autistic 100% is a very different 100% than the neurotypical 100%. And I'm not trying to like make light or make less of effort that neurotypical people put in. But when an autistic person hears put in your 100%, what they hear is I need to do this until I drop to the floor. Like that is the 100%. There's no balance. It's black and white thinking, right? Um, the other thing I was thinking about while you were speaking is after I left my last role, I actually took a role through a friend who kindly set something up for me. And I was in a state of burnout, and it had been building for a very long time. And I was on the job for one day and immediately had like, I quit. And it was really embarrassing for me because as soon as it happened, I was like, I'm not ready. I can't do this. And because you reminded me of that when you were talking about, burnout at like the first day you knew.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess I'd really like to do a video on I know a lot of people like do good videos. I know you've done videos on like good neurodivergent jobs or like working and being neurodivergent in the workplace. So everyone should go check those videos out. Um, yeah, it's hard to find an environment where we can thrive long term. It's hard to find that fit. And I don't know why I was kidding myself, like, hit the ground running, let's do this, I got it. I was not ready to hit the ground running. I wasn't ready to hit the ground walking.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's like internalized ableism or it's just we just want employment, right? Like I don't know if we're being not realistic for having those desires or expectations. I don't know. I've kind of come to the conclusion, maybe this is just my personal dream job, but I suspect this would be an ideal environment for most people, but it's like a unicorn that I don't know if it really exists, but would be like 30 hours a week, so it's not too much. It's partly office, so you get the structure, but it's like a hybrid, right? So partly at home, so you still have your space that prevents you from totally getting burned out. So yeah, that to me would be the perfect scenario. Now, I don't know if jobs like that really exist, especially when you're trying to push yourself and learn and yeah, challenge yourself. But yeah, that would be the perfect scenario for me.
Yeah, the problem with jobs like that is everyone wants that job.
Yeah,
So
like I said, they're unicorns. I don't know how, but um, but just after thinking about it, I just think that would be the ideal situation, some sort of mix. Because if you just do it entirely at home, it's like you like the structure. I think some of us, not all of us, I know personally for me, the ADHD, I need the structure. I
mhm.
need to be able to see people. And it's also the rejection sensitivity. Like I need to ensure that I'm doing a good job because I'll start ghosting people. So
Mm,
I need to have that face to face. But then on the flip side, if I'm there too often, that could cause the burnout
mm,
too.
mhm,
Of I don't know if it's like demand avoidance. I don't know. It's like the having to be on a routine, on their schedule,
mhm.
regardless of what's going on in my personal life. And sometimes things might seem arbitrary. It's like, why do I need to be here 9 to 5 if I'm just sitting here and I'm not interacting with? I have no meetings. Why do I need to be here? So it goes both ways. Yeah.
Do you have any tools that you use that have helped you with things like scheduling and staying on task?
No,
Oh,
not really.
totally
No,
fine.
I mean, I try. So what is it? Is it Keep or I know there's like a Google app that comes with, their package of services. And then there's, I don't know, some sort of Microsoft like notebook. Like I've tried different things that just are integrated in. And I might be really good at following them for like a day or two, and then I put them to the side, never to be seen again. The
I'm the
best thing
same
that
way.
works,
Even if things are going well,
yeah,
all of a sudden, one day I'll wake up and I'm just different.
yeah. Well, I mean, I do have like a notepad, probably works best for me. I don't know if that's a tangible, like I just see it physically on my desk, and that will help me kind of stay on task. But that's a real struggle for me. Me personally, I'm very chaotic.
I'm
And that's
glad that we're both notepad people. Like at when I was in a corporate setting, in an office setting, you could like turn around and in the file cabinet behind me, like pull the door open. It was like all of my notebooks. Just like every time I had to fill one up, I'd throw it back there, start a new notebook. Some people aren't really note takers, but I had to write every single thing has to be written down, especially if I have to be on the phone. I can't even follow the conversation if I'm not writing it down. So, yeah, I'm a huge proponent of the notebook. In fact, before I knew that I was neurodiverse, I used to like judge people for not being notebook people, but I didn't realize that not everybody needs the notebook. But yeah, you, I just love a notebook. I
Mhm.
I feel like if something happened and they were like, you know what, we're gonna take stationery out of the picture, I don't know that I'd be able to function. Like, like
Well,
if there was no notebooks, I'm done.
it's funny. This is just a total tangent. I don't know if this has to do with being neurodivergent at all. I swear I have some sort of challenges with the reading and processing, but for me, even like reading, I have a hard time. I prefer, like, I'll print it out. And I'm working with all these people that are just very like tech oriented. And I feel like, the old lady here having to print like books out,
Yeah,
massive
not a
PDF,
screen reader
so that I can
either.
mark them. I can mark them.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just, again, maybe some learning issue that has anything to do with autism. I don't know, because I know plenty of autistic people who are just fine with it. But yeah, I don't know. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's nice to meet a fellow notebooker. Uh, I don't use them as often now, but even if I actually want to get anything done for the day, a list will be going in a notebook somewhere. Even if
Mhm.
I don't um even if I don't end up using the list, I just need to get my thoughts on paper.
Yeah.
And I find that when I try to convert that over to virtual, I really struggle to keep that up. That's really hard for me.
So do you ever get frustrated? This just reminded me. So at work, I'm good with notebooks. At home, it's just random pieces of paper and notepads and things get torn off, or I might type up notes and I print it so I can mark it up. And I get very frustrated. I have so many just heaps of paper. And then I get mad at myself because I'm writing out all these ideas and these things that I'm not actually taking any action on. I
Mm.
don't know if you've ever dealt with
Yeah,
that.
I've been through like different trainings before, like productivity trainings where they're like, don't use post-it notes and don't use papers because they get everywhere. Um, so I can definitely see that happening. I try not to do papers, but
Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's just a frustration for me because I'm spending so much time almost like ruminating on my ideas and I'm not taking any action. And I
Mm.
could spend a whole day writing out things that I'm gonna do, or I want to write a blog post. I want to just things, right? That I like written work product. I just toil away and I never get anything done.
Oh
And
yeah,
then I
I
get
can get caught
mad
in the weeds like
because I
that
see
too.
these piles of paper, all this work that I've never done, never followed through with. I don't know, just
I do,
another
yeah, I'll type
neurodiversity
up
thing.
notes and things like that for the channel, but I guess I don't have a ton of paper around, but I do know how that could happen. And I do know that it's a pretty common experience to have. Especially the idea of like getting like I love to plan, but then like putting that into action, it's like a not a very high success rate.
I think that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Um, I want to write out how everything goes, but then my issue with that is if something changes, and I've gotten better at working at this, but if something is changes in the plan in the past, I would have to abandon the whole plan, not do anything. But now I've gotten better at being more flexible. That's something like after diagnosis I've continued to work on. Like it doesn't have to be perfect, especially like working on YouTube. I don't need to know everything to have a YouTube channel. I don't need to say everything perfectly every time. It's not the end of the world. Um, I I try to hold myself to a high standard, but I don't have to. My best is good enough, and everything will probably be fine.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
still getting there.
Me too. I mean, I'm a work in progress. I always like to talk about that publicly because I never want people to think because and I've heard from people before and I totally get it. When you see somebody on the internet, like you only get to see what they're showing you.
Mhm.
So you can look at somebody and think, "Wow, their life is perfect or they have their whole life together and it makes so much sense and I wish I could be like them." And, they don't have the same struggles that I have, but that's just not the case. And unfortunately, social media, being on the internet, I try to show as much of my life as I can, but I can't show you all of it. And there are some things I won't show, you have to keep some things are private. And as a person who was late diagnosed and used to really struggle with not sharing everything, it almost even feels good now to be able to say, like, I'm not comfortable with sharing that, and I'm okay with not sharing that. I don't owe that to anybody.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good lesson. I'm not quite there yet. I'm still in like the total overshare mode, but that just might be me and my personality too. But no,
I
I get it.
I'm on a journey with you. I'm on a journey with you. There are still times where um I leave a lot, especially when I meet new people.
Mhm,
Um I'm better at like slowing myself down and not sharing my whole life story. Sometimes when I meet new people or I get a little comfortable, I do struggle with the line, like what is socially appropriate to share
mhm,
and what is like something that you would keep to yourself. Like the idea of like in social interactions, like there's your close family
mhm.
or a close friend, and that's a person that is okay to share really personal information with. But, the clerk at a store that you stood and talked to for 30 minutes is not that person. And I
Yeah.
really have struggled with that in my life.
Well, I just came, I mean, very recently and through the channel and conversations I've had with actually neurotypical people, because some of them watch my videos too, especially the ones on communication. And what I've realized is I've kind of put them in this box of they just keep things to small talk and they don't like get into like a lot of them don't like getting into deeper conversation or don't seem to, right? I don't understand. To me, it seems very trivial. And just again, through talking to some of my neurotypical viewers, the realization was, oh, yeah, they'll have these deeper level conversations and they might be able to advance to that fairly quickly, like just like we can with other autistic people, but they don't do it with us because they recognize that something's different and they
Mm.
choose not to do that with us. So they put that wall up, those boundaries, and they just keep it into that small talk, that zone, while we are maybe trying to advance it like maybe we would with the autistic person or whatever. We're not quite picking up on that. But yeah, that was something interesting that I very recently realized because I was just, oh, they just kind of enjoy the superficial small talk, talking about restaurants and movies and shopping, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of depth. You seem to have to know someone for a very long time before it advances. And it's like, oh no, it's just me. I had to know
Oh,
them for a long
interesting.
time.
I'm
It's
not sure if
other
I know that.
neurotypical people advance quickly. It's just that neurotypical to autistic that it's very challenging. So but that gets into your boundaries. So yeah, we had to recognize those boundaries, but if we were a neurotypical person, maybe we would advance quicker with these other neurotypical people, if that makes sense.
I think
Um,
it makes sense. I'm not sure if I've experienced that, but it's sometimes it's hard to say, right? Because I
yeah,
can only um you live your life in your own context.
yeah.
I think that what I have experienced is sometimes when you're very open very quickly, people might get the wrong impression that you're closer than you are.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand that.
Um, where and then they might feel more comfortable to share. Um, so that's something that I've had to work on where um maybe not sharing as much about myself because it's not a close friend. And if
Mhm,
I wasn't looking for that closeness with the person, I'm just used to being that open.
mhm,
Um, for that person, then maybe rightly so, assumes that because we've had that close conversation that now we are close. Um, that's something I've dealt with more. Uh, I even when I was I mean, when you're young and your parents are telling you things like, "That's family business."
Mhm.
or that's we don't share that with people outside of the like that kind of, not that there was like a ton of like secretive stuff. Sorry, mom, I know you're listening. Not that there was a ton of secretive stuff going on, but I was struggling with um like I just didn't know what was personal that was kept in a personal circle. To me, information was information.
Mhm.
And it was my almost my job to share it. I really struggled, especially in friendships growing up, about sharing too much
Mhm.
and people not trusting me. And I don't necessarily blame them because I don't know that I was the most trustworthy with information. Um, keeping like anytime I knew that something was private and a secret, it felt like the biggest burden on me. I don't feel that way anymore. Now I feel empowered, like to be able to hold people's thoughts and words safely. Did you feel like that when you were growing up at all, or?
Um, well, I hate to say a brat, but no, I mean, for one, I wasn't really social. I wasn't talking a lot. I didn't have really any friends at all. But I kind of the flip side of when I had that information, I was horrible with people giving me secrets because it was like, oh, I actually had something to talk about. Like I never knew what to talk about and how to communicate with people. But now I have a secret. Okay. So I'm going to share that. Like I was a terrible friend because I just didn't know how to have conversations and I didn't really understand relationship dynamics. And part of that was autism. Part of that was like in my case, it was a dysfunctional
Mm-hmm.
family, dynamic. So I wasn't getting that proper, that modeling, I guess, of how I
Mm-hmm.
should behave. And then I also didn't have a lot of that outlet at home where there was that trust at home either. So it might not be the best representation of an autistic person. A lot of it has to do with other things that were going on in my life. But yeah, I really didn't understand boundaries well at all. I didn't understand. Yeah, someone tells me something personal. Okay, yeah, a good topic. And it's taken me a very long time, even like post diagnosis, like you were saying, to understand like the levels of information and what's appropriate um, to to discuss. And one of my challenges has been that I've almost just pulled in too much
Mm,
because I've just become so fearful of sharing too much with of myself. And just it's this line. And I guess that's the good side of it is I don't have a big circle. It's just me and my partner, partner's family, my children, like so it's okay. Um, but yeah, I'm not maybe it's almost like I don't trust myself. I
yeah.
think that's a lot of it. I worry if I'm too social, if I'm myself, I hate to say I'm gonna do something stupid because it's not so much I'm gonna do something stupid. I'm going to act like an autistic person. I'm going to be misunderstood
Mm.
and then be judged poorly for it, right?
You're
Um,
speaking to me. I understand what it's like to pull back
yeah.
and to be afraid to speak one's mind because you're afraid of, I mean, just think of, you know, you have this life where you're constantly told it's too much, you're not trustworthy, you're sharing too much. Like eventually you just go back into yourself.
Yeah.
And I even struggle with, um, well, I kind of struggled with this even like writing papers in college, like this idea, because I was always like, comments were usually like, research is good, but you didn't say anything. Like the idea, like put myself out there to give my thoughts, my opinions, even on YouTube platform, I struggle to share what I think because I'm so worried that I'm not going to represent myself well, or I don't have, what if I don't have all of the information correct? What if I'm wrong? Um, and I also fear those things in relationships. Like, am I gonna mess this up? I have this like overwhelming anxiety about like if I spend long enough with a person, I'm gonna mess it up.
Mhm.
So, um, I've I think I've been really happy to have found a place in the autism community where people are a little bit more understanding. And I think as time goes on, I feel a bit braver. But because I'm like so regimented in like it has to be the truth and it has to be right. And um, I don't even want to give my opinion unless I can back it up with the research.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're really speaking to me when you're talking about like kind of closing yourself off and being almost scared of your own voice because you're kind of taught to be afraid of how you're going to mess it up.
Well, you're taught that who you are is wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then the other aspect, like what you're speaking of, like you build this almost this identity, this perfectionism, you have to present a certain way. And I've been really challenged with this because that's become my identity, especially professionally. That's the expectation that I bring this level when I come into the room. And like my partner will have conversations. He'll say, like, Karen, you need to just relax a little bit, or you don't need to, whether it's just work so hard or just being so detail oriented, just everything I do, right? It's like, just, you don't need to do so much. It's like, but I do because that's the expectation.
Hmm.
I'm not, don't prepare this like meticulous paper or, design or whatever I'm doing. And it's not just incredibly thought out. I feel like I'm not living up to this expectation that everyone has of me, right?
But
Uh,
then it's also an expectation that you've built up for yourself, like because you feel that unless I bring this level, then I'm going to receive the feedback that I've gotten that it's not okay.
yeah.
And what I found interesting is when I used to get really, and so I still struggle with getting upset when I feel that other people aren't putting in the effort that I've put in
Mhm.
and coming to the realization that not everybody needs to operate on the same way that I operate. Like even if somebody was successful, like somebody's successful around me, if I feel like they're not taking it as seriously as me or they're not putting in the amount of work, I'm like, well, then does it really like I would get upset because I it wasn't to me that like there was only one way to the success, and that was the way that made me feel comfortable. But that's actually not necessary for things to work out.
Well, it's funny you're reminding me. So one of my mentors, he would tell me often, because he would get on me just for just being so meticulous and just so worried about the details that he felt like they didn't really matter. It didn't matter to the extent that I thought they did. And he'd be like, Karen, I'm an 80% guy, 80%, that's just, that's good. So he's, maybe that's a good place for us to remind ourselves, just be, at 80%,
Yeah.
because once you hit the 80, it's really just the returns, it's the diminishing returns. How much are you really getting back on your effort? And so maybe just something to think about. But yeah, he would get on me about that all the time, and I would still be like, oh, okay. And then I would just continue to work too hard on things and just overshoot things because that's
Yeah,
just who
you
I am.
don't need to like make yourself physically ill to do a good job.
Yeah, but I'm still going to do it anyway because of
Yeah,
persistence.
because
It
I
becomes
need,
part of our identity. Like I don't know
yeah.
how, but he would still, yeah, like this was again, he's my mentor, and it's just every few months or so, I was like, Karen, come on, yeah, it's just 80%. It's like I hear you, but I don't know. Maybe that will help someone. You don't need to exert yourself so much for
Yeah,
most people.
the extent of like, like when they do those skits of interviews and they're like, well, what's your issues? What are some of your weaknesses? And they're like, I care too much. Like
Yeah,
that's the autistic way right there, where it's like,
yeah.
this is actually not as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. Like that's been really hard for me to step back and see that. Because I think that, I've done a lot of different things since with the channel. I know you have as well. Uh, but so a lot of people might say like, okay, you're doing really well. Like you're doing all these things. But in my mind, I talked about this a few weeks ago on Porch Coffee about like my failing channel, which I was really just talking about um when I watch videos that tell you how to be a successful YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I ain't that,
Yeah, I watched it. I saw, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not me. I'm not like super niche, all of these different things. Um, uh-oh. I just lost the thought. I'm sorry, Karen. Just give me a second. I'm not gonna cut that out.
Artistic moment here. I'll give you here. I'll some water.
Um, I won't cut it out. We'll just roll with it. Well, I was talking about because people will be like, "Oh, you're doing amazing. You're doing these things." And in my mind, I'm like, I had a vision of what it was going to be like, and I'm not meeting those things. I'm not meeting like these ideas. So that means failure, but that's not actually the case. And that's the only reason that the channel has continued to grow and the um, more people are watching and are getting to see the podcast and all these different things is because I haven't quit.
Mhm.
Even when it says when my brain is saying like, well, you're a failure. I mean, what does it even matter? I'll just keep failing my way forward, I guess. Just
No, I've
trip
had those
me
moments.
forward.
Yeah. No, I've totally had those moments where it's, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through it? Because it is hard for those who don't know. There's a lot involved with it, hours and a lot of time put into the videos, whether it's writing the outlines or filming it and then realizing that whatever you filmed was bad. Like I've had videos that I just never aired. So there's a lot of time put into it. And then when you do that and then it doesn't perform well, and you're like, yeah, why am I doing this? So a lot of it is the showing up. Um, and I think like one thing I appreciate about your channel is that authenticity. Like I saw that video. I think that was the one where you're talking about what you're just trying to provide, speak to a true experience, the whole autistic experience, not just a part that likes to talk about autism, but the other aspects of who you are. And there's, that's nice. And that's a bit different than what most of us are doing. So there's definitely talk about a niche or niche, whatever. There's definitely a space for that. And so, I go through similar challenges with me. Where I mean, I think we both know how to grow the channel and how to do it quickly, but it is that balance. Like I talk about ugly stuff. Like, yeah, I talk about my PTSD and just trauma and depression and just stuff that isn't really great sometimes, but it's that whole story. So I don't know, is like, to your point, it's just still showing up and knowing that there's people there that appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I do want to point people to Karen's channel, Proudly Autistic, because she's only several hundred away from reaching the 10K mark. So her link will be down below, and I hope that you will go over, whoever watches this. Uh, usually we get at least 1,000 views on the podcast, which means if you maybe we can get you a few hundred, no guarantees, No, no guarantees. You know, like every just like you were saying, you're like, this video is gonna be so good. And then like it's crickets. But
Yeah.
if you're listening to this now, make sure to check out Karen's channel because it really is I find that your work is thoughtful. It is honest. Um, it doesn't sugarcoat things, but I don't find you overly negative. Sorry to sit here and compliment you, but I think it's a really great resource, especially for later diagnosed people to find um, a safe place to listen and understand themselves better. And I think that you provide that. So I want to encourage you to keep going. And you give a lot of great advice, especially around careers, relationships, communication. So if that's something that you're looking for and you're listening, Karen is a great place to look for that. So I will point you to her. Uh,
Yes.
what I normally ask people at the end of the podcast is, do you have a short message that if you were an autistic person listening, what would you want them to know?
If I was hearing this message, newly diagnosed, I think it'd be helpful to know that it does get easier.
Mm,
It does get easier with time, but it does take time because it's a lot to process. And you're going to go through quite a few emotions. First, it's going to be the relief, and then maybe you go through that forgiveness. You might feel anger towards other people and just that frustration and trying to figure out where you fit now that you have this new information. So it does take time. You're not going to get there immediately. And it's just giving yourself grace through that process that you will get there, but it will be different than when you started. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
wonderful. Well, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Anything that we should know about your channel? Any plans you want to talk about or?
Well, I am going to, it'll probably be another month or two, but I will be making announcements in regards to some offerings on, I don't know, discussion boards, classes, something where we could start talking about job challenges,
Mhm.
certain things that I'm not necessarily comfortable given that, I am employed. I don't necessarily want to talk about freely on YouTube, but we could do a bit on an offline or a more private setting. So I'll be providing information on that and just being able to, again, talk about our challenges with employment, talk about our challenges with communication, just understanding how we could thrive a bit better as adults. Yep,
Thank you for being on the show, and I hope that we might continue the conversation another time. And
absolutely.
have a great day. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you.